Hello, and welcome back to my Novacore coverage. This is round 3, the last game of day 1, and I will be playing Supremacy versus Kevin Hamilton from Loss of Lieutenants Shasvastii. This actually made me really happy. Kevin and I have played a few times before. He's just super wonderful. He's an awesome guy. I was looking forward to playing him, although I was not necessarily looking forward to playing Shasvastii Expeditionary Force. If you're interested in a breakdown of this game from Kev's perspective, it was actually covered in a recent Loss of Lieutenant episode. They did a long and full recap that is a super enjoyable watch. You can actually see it on YouTube as well as hear it on their podcast. And this is, as best I can reconstruct his list, I think it is accurate. I actually think it is accurate down to the combat groups. So what's he running? He's got a Sphinx as the centerpiece, pride and joy of his list, along with a single Speculo Killer Mine Layer, a Shrouded Hacker, a Mentor Hacker, a Caliban Engineer with 2 Slave Drones, 2 Nox, one is the Lieutenant, one is a Decoy, 2 Ichadrons, an R-Drone, and 5 DACCW Tiger Creatures. This is what you would call a very nice pure list that is making only a few concessions to the mission and scenario lineup, and is doing its job really well. In particular, I really like the existence of the Mentor Hacker, as compared to, for example, you could take a Shrouded Hacker in the same role, but the Mentor has higher whip, higher BTS, and gives counter intelligence, which I think is actually, I should put that. I have a Shasvastii list that I think I could find a spare point in. I might put the Mentor Hacker in that list, because that's a good change over the Shrouded, for only 1 point more. The Caliban has 2 slave drones, which will do, basically, it's an engineer. It can use the slave drones both to repair things like the Sphinx, and also to clear mines and give itself CC bonuses. Caliban is a fearsome close combat model, one of the game's Protheon models par excellence. And then the rest is just a swarm of Tigers, is a swarm of horrible, nasty Gribblies and a Sphinx. This plays, I think, really nicely both going first and going second in Supremacy. If it goes first, it has a Sphinx and a Speculo Killer. You are going to have a bad time. And it starts with a fair few points in zones. Obviously, only the Caliban and the Shrouded actually infiltrate or forward deploy, but those Tiger will be in a zone after their impetuous move. So the list pushes forward, and then you just do some like coordinated orders, some little movements to get the Ichadrons forward, and you have plenty of presence in zones. At which point either the Sphinx or the Speculo Killer can go bully. The Speculo Killer is the obvious reserve in this list because the Sphinx, like my Anathematic, can hit and deploy. I elected to take my Anathematic list in this game because, like I have with several games so far, 1, I was enjoying playing it, but 2, I was terrified of going second, and if I had to go second, I wanted my best list for it. I think it's honestly kind of possible. In fact, it's pretty likely that my Raicho list would have, if I had known that I was going to win the role, then I think my Raicho list might have been the best choice, because once the Speculo Mine Layer is dead, this list struggles to threaten the Raicho. It has a damage 15 Spitfire from the Sphinx, but I did not know that I was going first. I could not know that until after we had made the LT roll, and I was terrified. And I wanted at least some ambush potential, where maybe a Speculo, if it revealed, or a Sphinx, if it revealed, could be counter-ambushed by the Anathematic, and so I went with my Anathematic list. This was the table we played on, and I believe it belongs to, I want to say, Ryan Kershaw, who comes down to Timfinity events in Canberra occasionally, and who is super wonderful. But this table was a problem. It actually looks pretty good. So we can see, I love the central terrain feature, which is this long monorail that like bisects the board. We played this as if any model could vault over it. That was kind of necessary because it is actually taller than even a Silhouette 3 miniature, I think, from memory. So just for playability, we said it blocks line of fire as it is, but you can always move over it. Pretend it's a ladder, whatever, I don't care. We played it as vaultable so that it was just easier to move. I love it as a terrain feature. I also like this kind of like platform in the middle and these cars you can move into and then through this car, which is super nice. And there are a few decent interior spaces as well. These buildings all have interiors, so I have removed the roofs to access them. I have no intention of going up onto those roofs. There might be noctifers about. And then there's an interior space in this table as this building over here as well, which Kevin has picked as his deployment zone after I won the role and said I would go first. The reason why I say this table was trouble is kind of just because the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Over the course of this game, the overwhelming number of firefights that were had would be between one or more models that did not have cover. It is hard to strip a model totally of cover in Infinity N4, and if that is happening regularly, your table is probably either too open or laid out in a way that just it turns it into a murderer's alley. And this was that lineup. I don't exactly know what my advice is to Ryan, other than that the table needs to be like probably 10% more dense. But it was just, if in doubt, I don't like the if in doubt add scatter as a panacea for all table building woes. But in this particular case, the table needs nooks and complexity. The interior spaces actually help, and it is good that they are accessible. But take, for example, the rails. The rails bisect the table, but if you are up against this rail and you're hoping to claim cover from it, you will not have cover against anyone that moves anywhere, basically. It's single, long, flat line. You could make this a more complex and playable game space by, say, putting some piles of crates against the monorail. That would provide a nook to put a model into and hide the model, maybe go prone, etc. Just stuff like that. This table needs a little more complexity and just a little more in the way of terrain features. In terms of the actual amount of stuff on the table, it's fine. It is worth noting that Kevin and I, before we played, did a little bit of readjustment to make the deployment zones less murderous. For example, I think this planter bed wasn't here, and this little like row of crates was not here. This was almost a totally empty space, and there was more stuff on this side as well, where it's like, ooh, geez, we better make it so that nobody dies immediately. Another example, right? This truck here, we moved it so that it was parked against this planter bed, which created a little space that you could put something that wasn't there before we just tinkered with the table a little bit. So this was already an open table before it was a very not open. Open is the wrong way of putting it. It was a deadly table. It was a table which looked like it had the right amount of terrain and then ruthlessly killed you. The effect this had on the game actually kind of meant, even after Kev and I had done some tinkering, meant that what we basically played was a game of Rochambeau. There was so little cover to be had and so much sort of exposed space that I punched Kev as hard as I possibly could, and then he punched me as hard as he possibly could, and credit to him for surviving to punch me as hard as he possibly could. And I just took a phone call, I forget what I was saying. Oh well, Kev and I, absolutely socked into each other, and the game was an interesting but very dangerous hot mess, which almost feels like it's like Shasvastii shouldn't. A game versus Shasvastii should be one of caution and tenseness and careful movements, but it was just I took a run up and kicked as hard as I could, and then he took a run up and kicked as hard as he could back. So how did the game actually play out? Well, as noted, I won the roll and I went first. Kev picked his deployment side, and I think that was a pretty good deployment side. His particular focus, I suspect, was on positions where he could easily move pieces from not in the zone to into the zone. And so you can see that kind of this picture, by the way, was taken sort of end of my first turn. There's a Nox troop here that will end up moving exactly 1 inch as part of a coordinated order to get into the zone on Kev's side, which is that's smart. That's a nice, clever pick. This camouflage marker here, would move, again, 2 inches and be in the zone. That's good. So I deployed, we had Bit and Kiss hanging out here. We had sort of some Dadarazi, some Tega creatures, the motorized bounty hunter. We played these windows as just you could walk through them. So there was a flash pulse bot in here and the Umbra Samaritan here. And then my anathematic would deploy behind this planter bed, just inside the deployment zone, a little bit further than that. Probably the most trying to be too clever thing about my DZ is that this is the Libertos' mine, and the Libertos himself would deploy here. The reason for that was that I was very conscious of speculo killers, and I wanted to break up a speculo killer mine that might stop me from taking impetuous orders. I knew I wouldn't be able to push the mines away completely, but by placing those 2 camouflage markers basically in my deployment zone, it meant that there were unlikely to be mines the speculo could place that would, 1, hit multiple units in the same detonation, or 2, basically get bit and kiss, who I didn't want to get got. They are important. But in this particular case, it didn't totally stop the presence of mines, but it meant that I would be able to safely impetuous, and that was pretty relevant because when Kev reserved his speculo killer, she actually went in this monorail cart here. The mine came down here, and that was okay. That was in a position where I could impetuous 1 Datarazi, dodge, and defang it. Nicely done. Kev's deployment obviously was all a bit mysterious because he's playing Shasvastii, but the important thing to note is that there was a camouflage marker down here with 2 slave drones connected to it, identifying it as a Caliban engineer. And then there were just sort of like various bits and pieces in Gribblies hidden and nooked around, and there was a camouflage marker in here. This was not an easy or obvious list to attack. Reason being, there were no visible hackers that I could just put repeaters down next to and annihilate. I resolved to play this aggressively because I had like 150 points worth of models in the Anathematic and the Chirontid who could feasibly do work. And at minimum, they could charge themselves into some zones and hopefully survive there. So, as mentioned, the basic scope of the turn is Datarazi impetuouses and then dodges, and then he will later, as part of a coordinated order, move up here to see the speculo killer. He'll actually move and discover, and he will discover her out of cover. He needed a 10, which he rolled. That's fantastic. The Anathematic revealed and moved up this direction, and then as part of coordinated orders, right, we got Datarazi up to there, we got another Datarazi up to here, and the Anathematic began cresting this way, including up this ladder. The basic plan was to get the Anathematic into this space where it is worth a lot of points. I think it might have killed along the way. So as it moved, this R drone chose to discover it, and I fired 3 burst plasma, may as well. I hit once, and the impact template knocked the R drone unconscious. That's great. That's 1 kill. But most of the work this turn would be done by this Chirontid. So it gets up to here. Datarazi discovers and makes a ballistic skill attack, which pops smoke down onto the speculo killer, which lets the big guy then move up, discover, and execute it with his pistol. I take 1 wound from her shotgun, I believe. Something wounds me here, and I think it's her shotgun. But I kill the speculo killer, and the heavy pistol has shock ammunition, so she's done out for the count. I then move along this way. So there's Datarazi smoke here as well, and I have to vault up over the little handrail, and that lets me take out an Ichedron that's on this rooftop. Then we move up to here, and I can discover and execute. No, it's not. Sorry, the speculo killer doesn't yet. The speculo killer tries to dodge the pistol, and she dies. It's this Caliban here. I get within 8 inches. I'm in smoke. I discover, shoot, 2017s, it has no cover, right? I've mentioned so many gunfights this game would be models that did not have cover. This is one of them. It elects to pulsar me rather than try and do anything else. I execute it with the pistol. I take 1 wound from the pulsar for my trouble. And I move back here. And I have basically 1 order left to discover. And I try a discover shoot against this camo marker, and it reveals to be a shrouded hacker. The face-to-face roll is inconclusive. It does not oblivion me. I do not execute it with my pistol, but there is enough orders left in the second pool for a Tega creature to run around here and berserk it to death. So, at the end of the first turn, I've killed an R-drone, an Ichedron, a Shrouded Hacker, a Speculo Killer, and a Caliban, which is a pretty good count, but it wouldn't be quite enough to lock Kev out of the game. In particular, he is not in loss of Lieutenant. He still has ample impetuous orders and irregular orders and command tokens, and of course there is a Sphinx that has been patiently waiting in the wings. So this is when the return swing in the game of Rochambeau happens, and it's actually wonderfully executed, like really wonderfully executed. Kev has like 4 regular orders and his impetuouses at this point. plus the 1 regular order from the Sphinx, but it will all be made to count. So the Tagers all swarm forward. They all take HMG fire from the Torontid, and they all make their dodges or make their armor rolls. I think one of them gets killed over here, but then the other 2, or there are 2 Tagers that make it up and around and just bury. It feels considerably more epic. Ultimately, the Torontid got killed by 2 Berserking Tagers, but it felt like he was going down under a swarm of Zerglings. He dies all the way to dead, and he Memnonicas into the Umbra. But that is 70 points that just went down to a pair of 6-point Tager creatures. Some other Tagers move up and around, but that's just all done using irregular orders. And the remainder of Kev's turn is about the Sphinx. It appears here, and it just beelines it this direction. That's its order. It just appears, moves. It's careful to stay outside of 8. This is actually really tricky to measure. It's are you in? Are you out? And I looked at it initially, and I was I think it's out. But hang on, let me measure it. And it's you know what? I said it's out. It's fine. You could have what we ended up doing is we just shunted the Sphinx back 2 millimeters. Cool, it's out. Game state restored. That's its order. It just moves up to there. Then it activates, and it moves. And then it activates. No, so it moves up to here, and it reveals, and it shoots the anathematic. It's out of cover. I'm out of cover, but I'm surprised. I take 2 wounds. So it's hitting on 11s. I'm hitting on 7s. It actually lands a crit and 2 hits. I fail Guts to get into cover, and Guts around here. It recamouflages, so it's appeared with this order and shot. Then it recamouflages. Then it just moves. So that's of 5 orders, that's the 3rd. It just moves back to here. Then it moves to here and shoots me in the back, and it kills the anathematic. So I am now down 150 points. Which is pretty bad. Kev has exactly 1 order left, and as his last order for the turn, what he needs to do is move things into zones. So that is the coordinated order I mentioned before. This Nox peeks forward, this Camouflage Marker peeks forward. There's maybe a Tager in this zone somewhere. And the Sphinx actually can't decide where it wants to go. It either wants to move in this direction to take up position here, or it wants to move onto the rooftop, and Kev is do I do this? Do I do that? I don't know. Maybe I do this way. I don't know. And I'm just Kev, okay, you've placed the model and moved it 3 times now. It's here. Now, where else does it want to go? Okay, I'll put it here. And I kind of for literally the entire movement, it's been inside zone of control of this repeater. And I mentioned that I had 2 dead aspects, which means I have 2 Whip 16 hackers. That's actually one of the really nice redundancies about this list, is that if your big kahuna pieces go down, they immediately Memnonica into your remaining 2 reserve hackers, who all of a sudden become incredible hackers. Now, Bit manages to whiff her Oblivion on 16s, but the Umbra does not whiff his possession, and 2 damage 16 hits later, the Sphinx is swiftly possessed, which means that rather than Kevin scoring this round, we have an even number of zones. It also means that I am back in the game. If the Sphinx had just kind of hidden back here, I would definitely have gone after it and attempted to possess it on my turn. As it was, I got it in the reactive, which was ideal. It opened up some options for me. If he had re-colored it, he would basically, so much damage had been done during his first turn that everything had to be done exactly as he did it. It was a really well executed turn, but he just did not have orders to recamouflage. So the Sphinx gets possessed, and in my turn, I'm only actually down 2 orders in my main combat group. I've only lost 2 models and a Tager creature. It's just that they are very, very, very expensive models. But the Sphinx gets possessed, and it gets walked around here. It sits in base contact with Bit, next to the repeater, and I run the Thetarazi backwards into base contact, and I leave them there. If Kev never repossesses that, I will never be able to kill it. But if he does repossess it, I almost certainly will kill it with Thetarazi, and if I don't, I will probably possess it back, or at least Oblivion it with Bit. So things are fine. The Sphinx is contained, if not dead, and I said about the rest of my turn. Bit herself will move up this way, and she will activate this console, and then hide back here, just leaving Kiss engaging the Sphinx along with Thetarazi. And then the Umbra Samaritan will go for a walk, and he will run up this way, He will activate this console, he will run around this way, he will kill a Tega creature and get some wounds, he will run around this way, and he will activate this console. And then I am about to move over here to try and eat this Nox Trooper when I think I'm out of orders at that point. It's possible that this Shrouded reveals, and I Trinity it, and it survives, but either way, my Umbra ends up in this zone. There is not a great deal that Kev can do to dislodge it. The Sphinx is like shot a Nicodron at some point. He's running out of resources. I've picked up wounds from the Tega creature, so this reveals to be a Mentor in Kev's turn, and it pops down this way, and it tries to shotgun the Umbra, and the Umbra Trinities it. The Umbra knocks it unconscious and takes 2 wounds, but 2 wounds is not enough to kill an Umbra who has eaten an entire Tega creature, so it survives. There is some basic faffing around, but that's functionally... At the end of this round, I will score points. Kev will repossess his Sphinx, but he has to kind of just leave it there. We play through another turn. Got all of the buttons pressed. I dominate a second turn in a row. I actually wonder if we even had 3 turns. I think he might have been in retreat by his last one, something like that. I probably repossessed the Sphinx just to... He's running out of command tokens. I barely even remember the end of this game, other than that it's the Umbra with the Charonted inside of it, storming up the board, doing the EI's work. And once it gets those Prothean wounds inside of it, it's just not possible for Kev to kill it with the pieces that he has left. So he ends the game. I think he begins his 3rd turn with 2 Nox Troopers, and decides that, yep, that's enough, cry uncle. He's done everything that he can. There's nothing more to be said. The Sphinx scores a point the Sphinx scores a secret objective that Gavin had set, or a special objective that Gavin, the TO, had set the players, which was at some point during the game to try and dominate your opponent's deployment zone, which the Sphinx handily does before it is just quietly ushered back into a possessed state. And that concludes the game. So I have the maximum number of buttons, I have secured the HVT, and I have scored 2 out of the 3 rounds, which is a very respectable 8-point major win, which I'm really happy with. So that, at the end of day 3, puts me on 3 majors. It means I am in current 2nd place going into round 4, which I learn will be against another Canberra local, Edward Sykes, which you'll see soon in the round 4 video.